From the PEP Radio Newsroom, this is the daily news for January 12th, 2026. These are the stories we are covering at this hour. The U.S. Supreme Court will hear back-to-back oral arguments on Tuesday for two cases that both consider whether state laws banning transgender girls and women from playing on women's sport teams violates federal law and the Constitution. On the stacked argument day, the justices will first deliberate on Little v. Heckox, a lawsuit brought in Idaho by a trans college student, and West Virginia v. BPJ, brought by a trans high school student and her mother. The plaintiffs in both cases, represented by the American Civil Liberties Union, allege that state bans on trans girls participating in sports violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and that West Virginia's law violates Title IX. The cases could have sweeping implications for both transgender and cisgender girls and women and raise broader legal questions around sex discrimination and privacy in education, advocates said. In other news, shortly after an immigration and customs enforcement agent shot and killed Renee Good in Minneapolis on Wednesday, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison heard something unusual was happening. Federal agents were not going to share their investigative file with their state counterparts. It was at least 24 hours before people started publicly saying it, Ellison said, declining to outline exactly how he heard about the federal denial, which occurred after an initial agreement for the FBI to work with the state's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension to jointly investigate the shooting. We started hearing they're not going to release it. They're going to exclude state authorities from the bullets, the gun, the crime scene. Ellison, who said he has a good relationship with the federal law enforcement in his state, tried to intervene. Can we call somebody? Can we work it out? Can we come to some understanding, he recalled thinking in an interview with Huffington Post. When the news went public, his hopes dropped. He sent a letter to federal officials pleading with them to change their minds, and he hasn't heard back. In news from Mississippi, congregants and leaders vowed to rebuild a historic Mississippi synagogue that was heavily damaged by a fire, and an individual was taken into custody for what authorities said was an act of arson. The fire ripped through the Beth Israel congregation in Jackson shortly after 3 a.m. on Saturday, authorities said. No congregants were injured in the blaze. Photos showed the charred remains of an administrative office and synagogue library where several Torahs were destroyed or damaged. Jackson Mayor John Horn confirmed that a person was taken into custody following an investigation that also included the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Acts of anti-Semitism, racism, and religious hatred are attacks on Jackson as a whole and will be treated as acts of terror against residents' safety and freedom to worship, Horn said in a statement. And in Pennsylvania news, a Pennsylvania mother was recently sentenced for handcuffing her 11-year-old son to a basement fuel tank in 2025. NBC News affiliate WGAL reports Chastity Candelario of Lebanon County pleaded no contest to multiple charges, including child endangerment. On Wednesday, she was sentenced to between 16 months and 5 years in state prison. Police say Candelario handcuffed her son to the fuel tank as punishment for eating too many hot dogs. He freed himself after 17 hours and called 911. WGAL reports that this type of punishment was not unusual for the child. That's the news for this hour. If you are watching our news videos on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to our channel. We will be sharing longer reports about both the U.S. Supreme Court hearing on Tuesday and further steps that Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison will be taking in the Renee Nicole Good case. PEP Radio is available on the Live 365 app, the PEP Radio page at paequality.com, Roku, and Alexa. Up next, we have the Meadville area weather forecast here on PEP Radio.